What if the most powerful voice in government suddenly turned against it? What if the White House press secretary, one of the most loyal faces of the administration, walked into the press room one morning and dropped a bombshell so explosive it shattered careers, exposed a national scandal, and turned her into the most talked-about whistleblower in America? This is the true-to-life inspired story of Karoline Leavitt, a rising star in American politics who risked everything: her title, her reputation, her future, just to protect families no one was willing to see. It all started with one strange detour: a driver acting nervous, a quiet diner in a forgotten neighborhood, and a hidden network working in the shadows to survive. What Karoline uncovered next would shake the country and force her to make an impossible decision: stay silent and protect herself, or speak the truth and face the storm. Stay with us, because by the end of this story, you may be asking yourself, would you have done what she did? Let's begin. The sun had barely risen over Washington, D.C., but Karoline Leavitt was already in her office, sipping black coffee and scanning the morning's security briefings. Her desk was a battlefield of folders, red-marked memos, and blinking notifications. Just another morning in the West Wing. Yet something was off today. It wasn't the news cycle or a political storm brewing on Twitter. It was Michael, her longtime driver. For the past 5 years, Michael had been punctual, precise, and eerily silent, a shadow in motion, always waiting outside her townhouse in the same black SUV, engine humming like a loyal dog. But lately, he had started taking odd turns. Routes slightly longer than necessary, streets that didn't match the daily clearance logs. At first, Karoline dismissed it as traffic avoidance. DC is a maze after all. But today, her instincts screamed louder than ever. "Rebecca," she called through her earpiece, "push the 10 a.m. presser. Tell the press pool I have a call with Asian stakeholders." Her assistant paused. "But you don't." "I do now." Downstairs, the SUV purred as expected, parked on Constitution Avenue. Michael gave her the usual nod. "To City Hall, ma'am?" he asked. She met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Yes, take the direct route, please." He nodded, but as they passed the Capitol, Karoline noticed his grip tightening on the wheel. She leaned back, arms folded, pretending to scroll through her phone while her mind raced. They were supposed to take Lincoln Boulevard straight to the administrative center. Instead, Michael veered suddenly into Ridgeway, an older neighborhood with boarded-up shops and graffitied walls, far from anything official. Karoline kept her voice calm. "Michael, is there a detour I wasn't informed about?" "No, ma'am, just a precaution." Precaution? She wasn't just a public face anymore. She had enemies, yes, but also security teams tracking her every move. Her daily routes were programmed, vetted, and cleared. There was no such thing as a just because detour. As the SUV slowed past a closed laundromat and a street preacher yelling about the death of truth, Karoline's fingers pressed a discreet record button on her smartwatch. Her political instincts, razor-sharp from years in the battlefield, were sounding alarms. Minutes later, Michael stopped near an old grocery store in a sleepy block of Libertyville. Karoline watched as he stepped out and greeted an elderly man behind the counter. "Evening, Mr. Joe. They moved the meeting again. It's at Mrs. Rose's diner." "A meeting?" Karoline remained in the vehicle, her eyes barely peeking above her sunglasses as Michael walked off. She waited 5 seconds, then slipped out the passenger side and ducked behind a mail truck. From a distance, she watched Michael turn a corner and disappear into a narrow alley between 2 brick buildings. She followed. Quiet, swift. A former comms specialist turned power player didn't learn counter maneuvers in debate school. She picked them up shadowing security drills no press secretary had any business attending. At the end of the alley was a yellow-painted house with ivy-choked fences and a porch light blinking like a bad signal. Karoline crouched beside a recycling bin as she heard voices inside. "There are 15 more families tonight," a woman said. Mrs. Rose, presumably. "They're scared, Michael. Since the announcement of that new development project, they think they're going to be kicked out." Karoline froze. The development project? The one her office had been publicly championing for months. The one promised to bring in jobs, malls, innovation? Inside, Michael's voice was calm but forceful. "We won't let that happen. I've got someone on the inside. Someone watching. They don't know everything yet." "Someone on the inside?" Karoline's breath caught. Was Michael using her? Was this a betrayal or something else? Just as she turned to sneak back, a notebook slipped from the bag of a young woman leaving the house. It landed near Karoline's feet. When the coast was clear, she grabbed it and flipped through the pages. Names, addresses, and then something that stopped her cold. A map, a detailed map of her daily motorcade routes. She couldn't breathe. Every turn, every stop, every coded timestamp. Who was Michael really? Back in her apartment later that night, she poured herself a glass of wine but didn't touch it. Rebecca called 3 times. She ignored them all. Her eyes were locked on the map and one scribbled note. Liberty Diner, 7 p.m. Bring the packets. Karoline made a decision. Tomorrow she would go there, alone. What would you do if someone you trusted for years turned out to be part of a secret network? Do you think Karoline is in danger, or is she about to uncover something much bigger than she imagined? Should she confront Michael directly, or continue spying from the shadows? Comment below with your theories, suspicions, or what you think Karoline will find next. It was 6:58 p.m. when Karoline parked the borrowed gray sedan at the edge of an empty lot across from Liberty Diner. The sky was melting into darkness, and the glow of the neon sign flickered like a nervous heartbeat. This wasn't just a late-night curiosity trip. Karoline Leavitt, press secretary of the United States, had canceled her meetings, put on a hoodie and baseball cap, and stepped out of the safety net of government escorts. For what? For answers. She gripped the notebook she found the night before. The pages had haunted her, families marked with stars, red arrows pointing toward properties labeled cleared, and that map, her map. Inside the diner, the usual buzz of evening chatter was strangely absent. Only a few booths were occupied. An older couple sharing pancakes, a teen waitress refilling water, and at the back a table of 5 people whispering over coffee. And there he was, Michael, her driver. The man who knew every route, every schedule, every classified detail about her life, sitting with a folder in front of him, looking like he carried the weight of 100 lifetimes. Karoline slipped into a booth near the back, behind a column. She ordered nothing, just listened. Her heart drummed harder with each murmur of the group. Words like eviction, corruption, testimony floated across the stale air like invisible knives. Suddenly, a man at the table pulled out a thumb drive and whispered something to Michael. "They'll destroy these if they ever find them?" Michael nodded. "We'll keep moving the drop locations. Liberty isn't safe anymore." Karoline's phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca. "Where are you? White House Chief Counsel asking why you skipped intel briefing." She ignored it. Her mind was locked on what was unfolding before her. Was this a vigilante network or a resistance cell? And what was Michael's role? Leader or pawn? A waitress passed by and glanced at her a little too long. Karoline pulled her cap lower, but the group was wrapping up. Michael gathered the folders and placed them into a worn leather satchel. Karoline made a move. She slipped out the front entrance and ducked around the side of the diner, pressing her back to the wall. A minute later, the back door creaked open. She watched as Michael stepped out into the alley, glanced around, and moved quickly toward a narrow gate leading behind an old laundromat. Karoline followed. She kept her steps light, her breath shallow. The alley narrowed, filled with the smells of old grease and damp brick. She heard voices ahead and moved closer, crouching behind a row of trash bins. "We have names, contracts, blueprints," Michael's voice. "And witnesses?" A second voice asked, female, sharp, and wary. "Families who were paid to disappear, others too scared to talk. But if we get this to someone who can make noise, maybe..." "That won't be enough," the woman snapped. "These people own the narrative. They'll twist this into conspiracy theory garbage before the sun rises." Michael paused. "Unless someone from the inside exposes it." "Who? A journalist? A disgruntled staffer?" Michael didn't answer right away. Karoline's heart pounded as silence hung heavy in the air. Then came the words that hit her like a brick to the chest. "I'm talking about her." "Who?" "Karoline Leavitt." Karoline blinked. The sound of her own name in that alley was electric. Her muscles tensed. "She's sharp. She's already suspicious." "I think she's been following me," the woman scoffed. "So what, you're betting your life on a press secretary?" "She's more than that," Michael replied quietly. She doesn't realize it yet, but she's the only one with a platform loud enough and brave enough to take this public. Karoline's throat went dry. Was she being manipulated, protected, or recruited? She stood up, quiet no longer. Michael froze as she emerged from the shadows. The woman gasped and reached for something under her coat. "Don't," Karoline said firmly. "I'm not armed." Michael's eyes widened. "Ma'am?" "No ma'am tonight," Karoline cut him off. "You've got 60 seconds to explain why my name is part of whatever this is before I call the FBI and every federal agency I have access to." Michael took a slow step forward. "I was going to tell you." "Then tell me now." He looked at the woman, who stepped back into the shadows, still tense but silent. Michael opened the satchel and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, of city officials shaking hands with developers. Wire transfers, contracts, eviction notices with forged signatures. "These companies," he said, voice low, "they're buying up entire blocks under the table. The new development plan? It's a front, a laundering operation, and the people being displaced, they're witnesses to crimes committed years ago during the gang crackdowns. This isn't just greed, it's a cover-up." Karoline felt the ground shift beneath her. She remembered the press releases she'd approved, the smiling renderings of parks and condos, the interviews she gave, praising the revitalization of old neighborhoods. She had unknowingly become the face of a fraud. "They're watching me too," Michael added. "That's why the detours, to drop information, to warn people, to keep the families moving." Karoline's eyes didn't blink. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" "Because I didn't know if I could trust you." His words cut, but she understood. In politics, trust was the currency most easily forged. Karoline looked down at the envelope again. The truth was there, raw, ugly, undeniable. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Michael's voice was steady. "A choice. You can walk away and pretend this never happened. Or you can help us. Speak up. Blow the lid off this." Karoline stared into the darkness, the weight of history pressing down on her. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind. Loyalty, duty, fear, legacy. Then she looked Michael in the eye. "You'll get your answer tomorrow. But if I do this, there's no going back." He nodded. The air between them hung heavy with unspoken truth. As Karoline turned and disappeared into the shadows, Michael whispered, "I hope you're still the woman I thought you were." If you were Karoline, would you risk your career and reputation to expose the truth, no matter how dangerous it might be? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Would you blow the whistle or stay silent? Karoline didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark, staring at the evidence spread across her apartment floor. Photos, emails, names, maps. Her apartment had never felt so quiet or so heavy. By dawn, she had made her decision. The next morning, the press room at the White House was more tense than usual. Whispers buzzed through the crowd like static. Reporters checked their notes, reloaded camera batteries, and exchanged theories. No one had expected an unscheduled briefing. Karoline stepped to the podium, no script in hand, no teleprompter, just her voice and the weight of what she was about to do. She looked different, stronger, more human. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Today's briefing will be unlike any I've ever given. I'm not here to spin headlines or defend talking points. I'm here to tell you the truth." A hush fell over the room. All eyes locked on her. "For the past several weeks, I've discovered that a number of powerful individuals, public and private, have been using a federally approved redevelopment project as a front for corruption, displacement, and the silencing of vulnerable communities." The cameras clicked furiously. "This information came to me through a source who, for 5 years, was more than just a driver. He was a quiet witness to the soul of this country, and through his courage, I found mine." She held up a flash drive. "This contains proof, documents, wire transfers, property acquisitions, and testimonies from families forced into silence." There was a moment of stunned silence, then chaos. Questions erupted. "Is the president aware? Are you accusing members of your own administration? Why now?" Karoline raised her hand, silencing the room. "I've already submitted the evidence to the Department of Justice. The investigation is underway. Names will be revealed. Positions will fall. But this is bigger than politics. This is about people. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. I spent my career defending power. Today, I'm using that power to defend the truth. Across the country, screens lit up with Karoline's face. Her words went viral. News outlets interrupted programming. Hashtags trended globally. Karoline Leavitt leaks, Docker truth over titles. Dash, Karoline speaks by nightfall. Her resignation letter was accepted with deep regret. But she didn't disappear. 2 weeks later, Libertyville looked different. The community center, once abandoned, was now alive with volunteers. Pupusas stands and old diners had become protected sites under emergency local ordinances. Families who once hid now gave interviews. Names blurred, but voices finally heard. And Karoline? She was back in that same neighborhood, this time not in secret. She stood at a makeshift podium in the center of Ashwood Heights Park. Around her were families, community leaders, journalists, and Michael standing to her left. She took a deep breath, scanning the crowd. When I first joined the government, I believed change came from behind press podiums. I was wrong. Change comes from sitting across kitchen tables, listening to people who've been silenced. Applause rose softly, then built into something louder, stronger. She turned to Michael and smiled. "You were right. I just had to remember who I was before all the cameras." He nodded, his eyes glassy. A child ran up with a drawing, Karoline standing in front of a microphone, a heart floating above her. She knelt and hugged the girl. The crowd clapped. And at that moment, it was no longer about scandal. It was about healing. That night, Karoline returned home and turned on the live stream one last time. She looked into the lens, tired but glowing. "I don't know what the future holds. I may never stand at another White House podium again. But I know this. Silence protects no one. And the truth changes everything." She leaned closer. "If you're watching this, I want to hear from you. Did this story touch something in you? Did it remind you that voices, no matter how small, can change the course of a nation?" She smiled softly. If this story moved you, comment the number 100 below. Let me know which country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far truth travels. And please, share this video with someone who still believes in justice, in courage, in doing the right thing even when it hurts. With that, the screen faded to black. But the echo of her voice lingered in the hearts of millions. How did this story make you feel? Did Karoline make the right decision? What would you have done in her place? Comment 100 below if this story inspired you. Tell us which country you're watching from. Share this video with your friends. Let the truth keep traveling. We'll see you in the comments.